ለመማር ወደ ትምህርት ተቋም መሄድ ግድ አይደለም። ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
ራሳችሁን ከኮሮና ቫይረስ ወረርሽኝ እየጠበቃችሁ በቤታችሁ ወይም በተመቻችሁ ቦታ በኢንተርኔት አማካኝነት በኦንላይን ትምህርታችሁን መከታተል ትችላላችሁ።
ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና ከእንግሊዙ ኢንስቲትዩት ኦፍ ኮመርሻል ማኔጅመንት ICM ጋር በመተባበር የሚሰጡ ትምህርቶችን ተከታትላችሁ በ6 ወር ጊዜ በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ ተቀባይነት ያለውን የስልጠና ማስረጃ ባለቤት መሆን ይቻላል።
ልምድ ባላቸው መምህራን እየተማራችሁ ጥያቄና መልስ የክፍል ስራዎች ፈተና መፈተን ክፍል ውስጥ እንዳላችሁት አይነት በኦንላይን ባላችሁበት ቦታ ከናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ
Hello, good afternoon, students. Give me confirmation whether my voice is audible for you or not. Give me your confirmation by raising your hands, please. Meron, is my voice audible? Okay, thank you. Nusuf.
Yeah.
Okay, Brooke, is my voice audible? Brooke.
Isamar?
Isamar is Brooke.
Isamar.
Okay, okay, thank you, students. Now we can start the teaching learning process. As you remember, we have covered 2 chapters. The first chapter was all about an introductory part, and the second chapter, we have seen a lot of concepts about arguments, logic. Now we are moving to the third chapter, that is chapter 3, is all about logic and language. As you remember from our first contact in the first class, we have seen around 6 features, the silent features or the attributes of philosophy. And we have said that philosophy is all about the analysis or the interpretation of language. It has its own language and meaning. This chapter is all about that attributes. In this chapter, we'll see what philosophy of language is, the concept of conceptualizing philosophy of language. We'll see some philosophical approaches of meaning. The truth theory, the condition theory, the externalism theory, we'll see those approaches, philosophical approaches. And also we'll see logic and meaning. Under that, we'll see term, what does term mean, the meaning of term, definition, and meaning. Under that, we'll see the different categories of meaning, the function of meaning, the emotive and the connotative meaning of terms. Finally, we'll see the types of definition based on their function. We'll see the types of function. The meaning, how a term is defined. So let us directly proceed to our today's discussion. As an introduction, and as you remember, we have said that logic was all about argument. It is the theory of argumentation, or it is the evaluation of argument of ours and our counterparts. So in logic, we evaluate the argument of ours as well as the argument of others. And we use different methods, principles, and standards, which will help us in evaluating those constructed arguments. So in order to evaluate the argument of us and the argument of others, the way the language presented within that argument must be in a clear, accurate, and an understandable way. If that is not the case, we are not able to judge, or we are not able to give or understand even the essence of that argument from the very outset. So that language has a paramount for presenting or transferring arguments. If that is so, those arguments must be presented in a clear manner. What makes them clear is the way that we use the language of philosophy. At the same time, so what makes those arguments good is that the language used within that argument. If the language used with the argument is clear, accurate, and understandable, we can easily evaluate it. So that's a good argument. So bear in mind, arguments must be presented in accurate and understandable language. If they are presented in arbitrarily, by using arbitrary languages, because of it might be lack of concentration, or it might be because of carelessness, or it might be because of negligence or lack of prudence, that will fail the notion of the good argument. So good reasoning or good argument can only transferred through good language. So if you want to transfer a kind of argument or a kind of reasoning that is plausible in the minds of others, it must be presented in a way of correct reasoning. If that is transferred or conveyed that way, it will be very sounding and admissible. So in order to interpret, analyze, and evaluate arguments well, one must give a close attention to the language. Because of lack of giving attention, proper attention for the language that we use, we may mislead others. We may not able to transfer the message or the point that we wanted to tell them. So there are errors in logic. As I have told you, those errors may arise due to lack of concentration, or it might be improper use of language, so that these mistakes leads to the misunderstanding of the nature of that language. Hence, therefore, logic requires proper use of terms and statements. I think you are familiar with statements. We'll see what term is. We'll see what a term is, the definition of term in logic. With the context of logic, we'll see it. So now let's see the definition of philosophy of language. As you can see from your screen, it says philosophy of language is the reasoned. It's not an arbitrary. It is a reasoned inquiry. A reasoned inquiry into the origin of language. The first thing in defining the philosophy of language is that the origin of the language, the nature of the meaning in philosophy, the use or the cognition of the language within a specific speech of community. Sometimes you call it a dialect, and the relationship between language and reality. So we can understand philosophy of language as reasoned inquiry about the origin of the language, the nature, the feature of the meaning, and the usage of or the cognition and its relationship with the reality. So that some people say that philosophy of language is a discipline that tries to raise questions like, what is meaning? Is meaning? How can we construct, how can we raise the meaning of a term or a sentence within it? So it gives an emphasis on the usage of the language within a specific community. So language is a body of standard of meaning of words and the forms of speech used as a means of expression, feeling, emotion, desire, thoughts in a consistent pattern of communication. Let me give you a clue about the communication, patterns of communication here. I think, I don't know whether you have taken an introduction course of management. I'm not sure of. If you take an introduction of management, you know the concept of meaning, emotion, thought, and patterns of communication. From the very outset, language helps us to convey our messages for anybody, any else. Sometimes, of course, some people use language as an identity marker. But when we see it in extreme way, it's not good. It's not advised looking language as an identity marker. But let's come back to the issue. In order to say that there is a communication, first, there must be parties, at least two parties. Then there must be an idea, an issue. That is what we wanted to transfer to anyone else. At the same time, we need to a kind of channel. It might be through face-to-face contact. It might be through telephone there. It might be another way. Whatever, there must be channel of communication. There must be a message. That's the idea. Then when a sender sends the message to the receiver, first the sender tries to interpret the message itself. At the same time, the receiver must also interpret the message in a way that is in conformity with what the sender tried to transfer to him. If that is not, there is no a consistent understanding of the idea itself. So that we cannot say that there is a communication between just two individuals. By any case, the importance of language for expressing our feelings, our interests, our aspirations, it has a paramount. It has a paramount. So there is also a systematic study of this language. We call it a semiotic study. And sometimes we refer to semiotic analysis of language. So according to semiotic, language is a manipulation and use of symbols in order to draw attention to the signified content. Don't forget, within semiotic or within language is not only limited to words and terms. Symbols, signs, like gestures, have their own contribution in semiotic analysis. So semiotic is the study of the process of communication and how the meaning is constructed and understood. Therefore, we study language, the meaning, how the meaning is constructed through communication, and the science within the communication. It's a study through semiotic. So it's an academic study of relationship between the language and other time to their meaning. So philosophy of language, however, should not be understood as similar with linguistic. There is a relationship, of course, but there is a distinction. The distinction between philosophy of language and linguistic. We have said that philosophy of language is an unreasoned inquiry. It is not arbitrary, it's a reasoned inquiry. Of the nature, the meaning, the origin of the language. Whereas in linguistic, we study or we compare one language with another. For example, we may compare what is the difference between the language between English and French, French and Portuguese, Portuguese and Latin. That is studied under linguistic. So there's these two concepts should not be understood as similar. There is difference. In relation with this, there is a great linguist who is known as Chomsky in the 20th century at the contemporary period, who studies about the importance of syntax and grammar in language. And according to him, he says that throughout the world, all language shared similar features that he calls them as a universal principles. So one language shares that attribute with the other. So there is a universal principles that will not assist us in identifying the difference. Simply there is universal principle which makes them nearly similar. In relation with this, he identified the internal and external language. The internal and the external language. According to him, internal language means as I have told you, there are some criteria. For example, grammar, which is the same with the other language, which means the language within it, the grammar that uses, the rules or the principles that teaches are internal to that language. It is innate to that speaker. It is inherent. It's not something that is learned. It is acquired through nature, because human beings are endowed with the ability to know and speak language. So they are inherently, by their innate nature, they are endowed with these languages. We call them as internal languages. It is internal to the speaker. Whereas external language can be understood as it is, it depends on, or it differs from a specific speech community to the other community because of difference in dialect. So that it is external to the speaker. So simply that is learned. So language has these two attributes in general, according to the famous linguistic man, the so-called Chomsky. And according to him, he says that there is Semiotic holism, which means the interpretation of the language or the understanding of the meaning of the term, a word or a sentence should not be relied on entirely to the words, the terms which are explicitly expressed on that. It depends on the features of the language in general at all. For example, interpretation of Arabic and Greek have their own difference of Semitic holism. Because we should not interpret languages by only referring those words which are clearly stipulated on that. It differs from language to language. It is based on the whole attributes of that language. That is why there are different interpretations in movies. Now, let's run to the second concept, that is the philosophical approach to the nature of meaning. Most frequently, as you can see from here, meaning can be described as the content carried by the words or sign exchanged by the people when communicating through language. So meaning is not only limited to the words. For example, when I use this sign, there is exchange of, there is communication between me and you. When I nod my head, there is communication between you and me. But there might be difference of exchange of sign and their interpretation. For example, in some countries, nodding is not considered as acceptance. It might be considered as rebellion against the idea. There might be difference, but within the context of the language, sign has their significance. So in dealing meaning, we should not only look at the content of the words carried, but also we need to look at the sign exchanged between. Some ways of communication may not give us the chance to use signs. But they have their own contribution in communication. So in general, we can see the two different types of linguistic meaning. Don't forget here, the linguistic meaning. The first is the conceptual meaning. Conceptual. Its meaning arises from its name itself, conceptual meaning, which refers to it is the definition of the words themselves. And also the feature or the attribute of those definitions. For example, I may define the term animal, which is a common name, which can serve as a term. Animal means I may define in such a way. Animal means I may say it's four-leg, which can breathe and such. This is the conceptual meaning of what animal is. It's defining the word itself. And I may add attributes of the animal. Just as I have said, breathe, a living organ, and I may use other features. Such kinds of linguistic meaning, we call it a conceptual meaning. It is defining the concept itself and defining it by referring the attribute of that term or that word. On the other hand, there is associative meaning. It depends on the individual mental understanding of the speaker. Is associative. It is the individual who can mentally understand the speaker. So we can look at these two general types of linguistic meanings. There are approaches. Of course, these approaches are not presented in detail even in your module, but to give you simply a kind of insight about the approaches of the philosophical nature of meaning. There are many approaches of philosophical nature of meaning, but these are the theories which are chosen for this course. The first approach is that the idea theory. This theory claims that meanings are purely mental content provoked by science. So, according to this theory, giving of meaning for terms or words is purely a mental content. It's a mental content, and it's instigated by science. And the second theory is the truth conditional theory. As the name itself indicates that meaning is to be condition under which an expression may be true or false. For example, I may say an ice is a white. Of course, it works. It works. So the meaning is it's based on the condition under which the expression is made. The condition matters. If it is true, it works. If it does not work, the condition is false. So the meaning relies on the condition under which that the expression is made, whether it can be true or false. The other is that the use theory. This theory understands meaning to involve or be treated as speech act and particular utterance, not the expression themselves. Some individuals, by their nature, speaks arrogantly. They cannot speak politely because of their nature, because of their character. But according to this theory, the speech act or the intonation or the voice that we use while we speak affects or gives the meaning accordingly. So they found the intonation, the way that we express the meaning matters on the meaning of the word. Though there might be similar message. One may say that don't do it because it's forbidden. The other guy may speak arrogantly like this, don't do this. Similar message, but the intonation and the physical expression or the way he speaks differs. So the speech act matters and the sound, not the message itself, not the word we use or the term we use itself. The other is that the reference theory, or sometimes we call it semiotic externalism. According to this theory, meaning is to be equivalent to those things in the ways that are actually connected to sign. It's external, it's outside the control of the speaker. Totally. Or the other is that the verification theory associates the meaning of the sentence within the method of the verification or falsification. It is giving of meaning of analytical and empirical methods. Meaning of sentence through demonstration. For example, in natural science courses, in chemistry, physics, it's verifiable. Is that verifiable? That is what the verificationist theory is that. The other is a pragmatist. As the name indicates, it's pragmatic. The meaning or the understanding of the sentence is determined by the consequence of its application. If it brings a good outcome, the interpretation or the meaning or the understanding of the sentence will be good, depending on the consequence that it brings. So in giving meaning or understanding of the sentence, what is the important thing is that the consequence of its application. This is, I think it's not enough. So what I recommend is that read reference materials, or you can browse internet, you'll get more information there.
በትምህርት ከፍ ብሎ መብረር ይቻላል። ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ከከፍተኛ ትምህርት አግባብነትና ጥራት ኤጀንሲ ሙሉ ዕውቅናን ባገኘንባቸው በማስተርስ ዲግሪ ኤምቢኤ በስትራቴጂክ ማኔጅመንት፣ ኤምቢኤ በባንኪንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ ኤምቢኤ በቢዝነስ ሊደርሺፕ፣ ኤምቢኤ በሪስክና ኢንሹራንስ፣ ኤምኤስሲ በኢንተርናሽናል ትሬድ እና ኢኮኖሚክስ ዘርፎች በእውቀት ለመቅረጽ የበቁ ፕሮፌሰሮቻችን አረንጓዴ መብራታቸውን አብርተዋል። በነገራችን ላይ በኬንያ ሀገር ከሚገኙ ስመጥር ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች በሚመጡ ፕሮፌሰሮች የትኩረት መስክ ትምህርቶቹ መሰጠታቸው ልዩ ያደርገናል። በምርጥ የትምህርት ስርዓት የተገነባው ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ በመጀመሪያ ዲግሪ በአቪዬሽን ማኔጅመንት፣ በሆቴል ማኔጅመንት፣ በአካውንቲንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ በማርኬቲንግ ማኔጅመንት አስተማማኝ ትምህርት ይገቢውና ራስዎንና ሀገሮን ይለውጡ። አድራሻ 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
Now let's look at logic and meaning. We have said language is a body of standard meaning of words in the form of speech used as a means of expressing feeling, emotion, desires, inconsistent pattern. And language requires symbols such as words, sound, gestures, signs that are patterned and related in a certain way for the purpose of the communication, communicating the meanings. At the same time, it's a tool of communication and the means of expressing ideas. So language is a way of conveying or transmitting information and arousing feeling or evoking feelings. In logic, we understand the purpose or the function of language as a means of conveying information and provoking feelings by using value claim words like good, fantastic, intelligent, very bad, like that. Because these terms can easily arouse our feeling and it lets us accept the arguer's ideas without raising question. Because he creates a kind of emotive feelings in advance before we accept the meaning of that. So in general, the function of language can be categorized under cognitive and emotive meanings. Cognitive and emotive. Of course, in language, words have their own importance, and they are very basic. So we should not underestimate the values of words in any language. They are basic units in language. So the functions of language can be to convey information and to express or evoke feelings. As I have said, in order to convey the information refers to the cognitive meaning. So the cognitive meaning of language refers to convey information. Its function is okay, please don't use your cell, accept Dell while you are online. So to convey information refers to the cognitive function of language. And on the other hand, the emotive function of language refers to the invoking feeling of the language. So the terminologies that used to convey information is cognitive. On the other hand, the terminology that we use or express to refer the emotive is that to express or invoke feelings. Let us look at this function. As I've said previously, language has two functions. That is the cognitive and the emotive. When we say the cognitive function of a language, it refers to we use language in order to transfer or in order to convey message to someone we in need of. So the essence or the function of the language that you speak maybe to convey your information, to transfer message. That is, we call it the connotative function of the language. On the other hand, we may also use language for the sake of arousing or invoking the feeling of ourselves and others, which means language may also help us to instigate our feelings, our emotions, our desires through using value claim words, which may increase the feeling of the listener, so that the listener can easily accept our emotion. For example, when we are hearing of human rights violation, and if we have used terms like violation of human rights, gross violation of human rights, these words are value claim. There is value within these words. The person adds his value in these words so that they can easily arouse the feeling of others. If we say that it's not bad, it's not good, violate the human rights of somebody. So we should condemn this. This expression contains a value claim words such as violation, not good. These words are very, very dangerous. Very dangerous. In our country context, even the activists use these value claim words to arouse the feelings of others. So emotive terminologies in argument allows the arguer to make a value claim about the subject matters of the argument, which means the arguer who is arguing an issue without providing evidence, providing supports for the point that he tried to tell you, it gives a kind of error of steamroller quality, which means it crushes the potential counter argument that you may defend that argument as a listener or as a reader. So it will not give you the chance to think wisely and in detail. You simply accept his claim because of he used a value claim words. So the emotive terminology in argument has such kinds of role. So effects of emotive terminology can be avoided because they are not good. This value claim words need to be looked systematically. There must be a thorough and a detailed scrutinizing of the fact within that argument. If that is not, it may lead us to make a kind of inappropriate decision. So in order to avoid, or at least to minimize, as a reader, you need to disengage the value claim and other cognitive meaning from the emotive meaning of the language. Within that argument, first, you need to separately identify the cognitive meaning of that argument and disengage the value claims. You simply reject the value claims, then you look at the cognitive meaning, or within an argument, you can put separately the distinct premises. After you separately disengage those premises or those claims, you'll ask yourself, are those evidences, are those claims are strong enough to make or to deduce a kind of this value claim judgment? Then it gives you the chance to avoid the correct information that contains within it. So what is advised to reduce the effect of emotive terminology is separating the premises and the conclusion. Because some arguers simply use defections, fallacious reasoning to convince or to persuade their argument on the eyes of the others by using those value claim words. But as a reader or as a listener, if we scrutinize in detail, if we look at the premises separately, we will ask a question: are those evidences or those premises can help us to make a kind of this inference? Then we may get the chance to know the fact. So it's an important thing. So there are defects in cognitive meanings, defects or deficiencies. We have said that in order to form a kind of good argument, the language that we use must be presented in a clear and a well manner. If there are defects such as vagueness and ambiguity, hopefully will not understand the cognitive meaning of that expression or that argument. So we should manage those defects accordingly. In general, in the cognitive use of language, there are two defects. The first one is vagueness, and the second one is ambiguity. A linguistic expression is said to be vague. I think you are familiar with the word vague and ambiguity. But for the sake of this course discussion, let's look at its definition. So according to linguistic expression, an expression is said to be vague if there is a broad line or a cases in which it's impossible to tell the expression applies or does not apply. A vague expression often allows a continuous range of interpretation. So we will not have a single interpretation. There is a continuous range of interpretation in vague expression. So that expression, within that expression, the meaning of that expression is imprecise. Is hazy and obscure. Let us look at examples, for example, words, vague words. For example, love is very, very vague. Happiness, peace, excessive, fresh, rich, poor, normal, conservative, and polluted. These are the vague words which are expressed in our module. There are also other vague words. But what makes common of these exhaustively illustrated words and other words is that their meaning are imprecise. There is a continuous range of interpretation of those words. So vague is not only limited to words. Vague expression also affects the entire statement. On the other hand, an expression is said to be ambiguous when it can be interpreted as having more than one clear distinct meaning. Don't forget this. There is more than one clear. On the case of vagueness, it's obscure and not precise. It was imprecise. And there was a continuous interpretation. But in the case of ambiguity or ambiguous expression, there is more than one clear distinct meaning in a given context. For example, the words such as light, proper, critical, stress, mild, inflate, just, frank, and these are ambiguously expressed words. There is also vagueness as the same in point, like vagueness, there are also ambiguous expression in a statement. This ambiguity can result from the way in which certain words are combined. So there is trouble in language, which means we may use words that is imprecise, which does not connote the situation that demands. At the time, there might be defects. which might be vague at the same time, which might also ambiguous. Let us look at examples. As I have said, there is difference between ambiguity and vagueness. In the case of vague terminology, there is continuous, as I have said, continuous range of interpretation. Whereas in the case of ambiguity, there is multiple discrete, there is certain interpretation, one or more than one. But it's distinct. So a vague expression is there is a blurring of meaning or imprecise meaning, whereas in ambiguous expression there is mixing up of otherwise clear meanings. Vague expression or vague meanings is used when where something lacks precision or detail, while ambiguous is something that could have two meaning or it's open to interpretation. Look at these examples. When I say we have seen ambiguous words and also vague words. Now let us vague and ambiguous statement expressions. Look at this statement. I know more talented student than Stephanos. And it says also, he did not live up to my expectation. Look at the second kid. He did not live up to my expectation. This sentence or these expressions lack clarity. I don't know his intention. What was his expectation? If I say I didn't get you as to my expectation, are you in a position to clearly understand my expression? Not at all, because you don't know my expectation from you. What was my expectation? Is that achieving a grade, scoring grade A? Is that to become a disciplined student? Is that appealing to be punctual on online conference? What is my expectation from you? You don't know my expectation. So this expression lacks a kind of clarity. So this sentence is a vague expression. When we see the first example, I know more talented student than Stephanos. From this expression, we may have two discrete interpretations. The first is that I know students which are more talented than Stephanos. For example, like Meron, Helen, Eman, I may say, Samrawit, Muhammad, or any. The second interpretation is that I know more talented students than Stephanos knows. So here there are two discrete or clear meaning of this expression. Means there is multiple discrete interpretation. So in this case there is ambiguity, ambiguous expression. So an expression which may be vague or ambiguous is not only limited to words. It will also affect the entire sentence or statement. However, there are many forms of expressions that are ambiguous in one context and vague in another. Of course, it's obvious. There might be expressions which are vague and ambiguous at the same time. For example, an ambiguous expression, I mean a vague expression, has the chance to become an ambiguous expression. You can take the first example. For example, the word slow, in the case of words in one text, it could be either mentally retarded or physically slow. But when the word refers to physical slowness, it could be vague. Is there physical slowness? Physical. It's vague. When I say physical slowness, what does it? It's very vague. So there are words which are both vague and ambiguous. How slow is it? Similar remark applied to light, fast. These words are also both ambiguous and vague. So the vague and ambiguous, the role of this expression within an argument, very conveniently explored in the context of conflicting arguments between individuals, not in conflicts in management. Conflict in logic, we call it a dispute. So what are the forms of dispute in logic? We have seen the two defects, the vagueness and the ambiguity. Now let's see the disputes or the conflict in logic. In general, the disputes can be verbal and factual disputes. When we say disputes that arise over the meaning of language, we call it verbal disputes. These are disputes in which the apparent conflict is not genuine and can be resolved by coming to agreement about how some words or phrases is to be understood. So this forms of dispute is very simple and it can be resolved again if we give the chance to paraphrase or re-express the idea again. I may understand that dispute. So, as the name indicates, it's a verbal. That is, the dispute arises from the verbs. It's not from facts. It's not about the genuinity that contained within it. It's a verbal. So, if I re-express, it was to mean that like this, or if I paraphrase it, it might be resolved. So resolving a kind of verbal dispute becomes very easy. Some disputes arise over disagreement about facts. This is called a factual disputes. These are very heavy and they are disputes based on genuinity. The apparent conflict is arise because of the dispute or the contradiction on the nature of that fact or the genuinity of that idea. So it will become very difficult to manage it. It cannot be solved like verbal dispute by paraphrasing it again. For example, if there is difference in ideology, realism and liberalism, these are two extreme ideologies. If there is a dispute of logic in their argument in this issue, the differences or the disputes arises or comes out of difference of facts or genuinity there, because they have different ideology. Because liberalism is all about cooperation and democracy. On the other hand, liberalism is all about mighty and wealth as an instrument for protecting the sovereignty of the nation, which means there is a huge fact difference between this ideology. So reconciling this difference becomes very tricky and difficult. So in logic, such kinds of disputes, we call them factual disputes. And they arise because of the truth or the falsity of the claim. In dealing with disputes, but in general, what is recommended or what is important is that first, question is, we need to identify the forms of dispute, whether it is factual, verbal, or both. After we have identified, the second question is whether that comes from ambiguity or vagueness. If we say that dispute comes from ambiguity, what we can do is that we say in the case of ambiguity, there is multiple distinct interpretation. So making clear that multiple discrete interpretation may help in handling that disputes. If that's based on vagueness, it is better to again invest our efforts on that. That is why we have said vagueness and ambiguity has a role in resolving dispute in logic. We have seen the two functions of language. Now let's see the intension and extension of terms. It is very easy to understand the intention and extension of terms if you understand the connotative and the emotive meanings of terms or words. It's directly copied from that. But first, let's look at what a term is. For this course, a term is, it can be any word, or arrangement of words. It can be phrase. That may serve as a subject of a statement. If that term or word or that expression serves as a subject of a statement, we call it is a term. If it does not serve as a subject of a statement, it is a non-term. So in order to say a word is a term or an arrangement of a word is a term, it must be served as the subject of the statement. It is very key phrase to understand what a term is. For example, a names can be served as a term, a common names can be served as a term, a descriptive phrase can be served as a term. For example, when we say Ethiopia, when we say Djibouti, when we say Etazuni, the United States of America, we are naming the name of the country. It's a proper name. When we say Ababa, when we say Kabada, when we say Gavrakshtos, when we say Dangaro, when we say Gatlok, we are naming the name of the person. That's a proper name. When we say the executive branch of the government, the executive, this is the name of the institution. It's a proper name. So proper names in general can serve as the subject of the statement. So names of individuals, names of countries, that's names of an institution can serve as the subject of statement. So proper names are terms. Common names, such as, for example, what makes we human beings is common is that we're persons. So being a person is a common name. So person can serve as a statement, subject of the statement. For example, there are different types of houses, but what makes them common is that being house. So house is a common name. So house can serve as subject of the statement. So it's a term. When we say a descriptive phrase, for example, when I say that, so descriptive phrase, common names, and proper nouns can serve as the subject of the statement, so they considered as a term. Whereas other parts of the speech, such as verbs, adverbs, adjective, preposition, conjunctions, they are all non-terms. They cannot serve as a term. For example, when we say quickly, it's an adverb. Recently, it's an adverb. When we say on, at, it's a preposition. When we say either or, so that, therefore, conjunction. So none of them serve as a terms. So these, the remaining cannot serve as the subject of the statement. Simply, which means they are non-terms. So in distinguishing terms from non-terms, one must be sure that the word or group of the word can be used as the subject of the statement. If that word or that term serves as the subject, simply that's term. If it can't, it is a non-term. That is the distinction between non-term and a term. Okay, if you are clear with what a term is, now let us look at the intension and extension of terms. Intension refers to, it is specified by listing the property or the attribute of the term connotes. It is listing of the properties or the attribute of the term that connotes. Whereas extension of term refers to, it is a class or the collection of objects to which the term applies. To make it clear, let us look at examples. For example, look, automobile. I think it is what? It's a common name, yes? Automobile. It's a common name, so it can serve as a term. So if it's a term, we can speak about it is intension and extension. If it is not a term, we cannot say anything about its extension and its intention. It must be first a term. So it's a term, because it's a common name. The intention of the automobile is that the characteristics of in these types or the class. For example, an automobile is a passenger vehicle. It is one attribute or one characteristics of automobile. The other characteristics of automobile is that automobile is powered by engine used for traveling on road and highways. This is the intention of the term automobile, because here we have list the characteristics or the property or the attribute of the term it connotes. On the other hand, all members of the type or the class of the object, that is the automobile, is the extension of automobile, which means all automobiles. It includes minibus, it includes what? Cross-country vehicles. This is any car. The collection of these objects is the extension of the automobile. So all class or objects, it is not attribute. For example, if I put here, if I put here is vehicle V8, and if I put here another types of vehicle, totally they named us as automobile. So the extension is the collection of the automobiles. We look at it is demerit when objects or the object or that item is not exist in the universe. It is very difficult to show the class of object in case when the object is not exist on the ground. This is what intension and extension of a term is. A word are usually considered to be a symbol, and the entire symbols are usually called meanings. We have to take this one. So terms being made up of words and are also symbols, but the meanings they symbolize are two kinds: intentional and extensional. Well, take this one. When we say intentional meaning, if you understand what intentional term is, it is very easy to understand intentional meaning. Because we say that meaning is a word that may be a symbol or the entity that symbolized within it. So intentional meaning is also known as intention or connotation, which consists of a quality or attribute of the term it connotes. On the other hand, extensional meaning, also known as extension or denotation, consists of the members of the word's direct and specific meaning. The term symbolizes a meaning to individual persons. It's inevitable for a subjective element to invade the notion of connotation. Because, for example, there are different types of cats. At the same time, there are different perceptions on cats. One of you may have a good perception or may a good image of what a cat is, or what a snake is, or what a horse is. For example, Idana may have a good understanding of what a horse is, the connotation of the horse. It's good. His connotation about horse is good because he may able to ride a horse. At the same time, member may not have a good intention or good perception to horse because he may be failed while he's driving the horse. With an example. So it depends on the individual that connotes the meaning of that terms. So in order to avoid this individual difference understanding of the connotation of a term, logicians develop a conventional connotation. It refers to, it is the attribute or the term commonly called for in minds of competent speaker or language, which is acceptable to all. So having a conventional connotation can help us to avoid the individual difference in giving meaning of the terms. So under this interpretation, the connotation of a term remains more or less the same from person to person. Then after, the interpretation of member conventional connotation of term horse, they will have at least nearly a similar understanding of what a horse is. If there is no conventional connotation, their difference still exists. So it has a very important role to resolve difference of connotation of terms among individuals and persons. Empathy extension. When we take an empathy extension, when we say extensional meaning, it's all about listing of the objects. For example, assume that, or in fact, dinosaurs has been disappeared on the universe. So if you wanted to show the extensional meaning of dinosaurs, we cannot do that because we cannot bring the different types of dinosaurs on the earth. It has been already abolished, or it has been already, it is over. We cannot find it on the earth. Distinct. So such objects, we call them as an empty extension. It does not have an extension, or it is empty or null class. We cannot find the class of the dinosaurs on the earth. While these terms have empty extension, however, they do not have empty intention for the connoted variety of intelligible attributes. But still, though it is a distinct animal, though it is disappeared on the earth, we know it is attribute. So we cannot say there is empty intention. Only we can say empty extension. We know it's attribute, that is the intention of the dinosaurs. That is what we mean empty extension. So there is the rule, we call it intention determines extension, which means the most important thing in determining the meaning of a term or a word is not the extension, rather the intention of that term. We cannot say that the extension determines the intention. It is the intention that can determine the extension. Intentional meaning of a term can serve us as a benchmark or a criteria for deciding what is the extension consists of. For example, take example, the word cat. Serve as a criteria for determining what is and what is not a number of the class of the cats. We call it intention determine extension, but not extension cannot determine the intention. One kind of the term that raises a problem for the intention determine extension is the rule of proper noun. For example, when we say apple. When we say apple, what is its intention and its extension? So in the case of the proper names, it become very problematic for determining its extension, and then know its extension. So the distinction or the difference between the intention and the extension may be further illustrated by comparing the way in which concepts can be used in the order of random sequence of terms, which means the intention and the extension of terms can be in a decreasing, at the same time it can be in an increasing order. Let us look at examples, for example. Look at these examples. First, examples of increasing intention. An increasing intention refers to, it is a kind of intention of what? From animal to tiger. It is not the class it contains. Rather, it is the attribute that it contains in its successive attribute of the term. For example, when we see the attribute of the animal, and the attribute of mammal and feline and tiger, it is in an increasing order, which means there are more attributes, because tiger has an attribute of a tiger and has an attribute of the remaining, which means a tiger has a more attributes than those terms before it. That's why we're saying an increasing intention. Here, the mammal has a more attributed than the animal. The feline has a more attributes than the mammal. And the tiger has all the attributes which the feline, the mammals, and the animals contains. So the attributes in the successive way is in an increasing order. That's why we're saying it's an increasing intention. Don't forget, increasing intention and decreasing in extension are similar. You can look at the order. Is the animal, in both cases is mammal, because in the case of decreasing extension. In extension, we look at the attributes. I mean the members, the class of the object it contains, not the attribute. The attribute apply in the case of the intention. That is the object, the number of object it contains. It decreases here from animal, mammal, feline, and tiger. When we see the increasing extension, it starts from tigers, then feline, into the mammal and animal. Here, there is more members in each set of object from tiger to animal. The animal, here the kingdom animal, contains more members than the mammal in terms of member, not in terms of its attributes. In terms of it is members, because it contains these all members. These all members. That's why we are increasing extension. That in the case of increased extension, it takes more members in sets of objects from left to right. Increasing extension and decreasing intention are similar. In the case of decreasing intention, the attributes decreases within each successive attributes. For example, the attribute of the feline is less than the attribute of the tiger. The attribute of the mammal is less than the attribute of the mammal. The animal is less than the mammal. It's in a decreasing. So don't forget, notice here, an increasing intention is more attributes. This is the key to understand these examples. More attributes in the case of increasing intention. More attributes in each successive terms. Whereas in the case of increasing extension, there is more member or objects in each sets of the object from left to right, from this to this one. I think we may use the remaining five minutes for questions and answer. So please, you're welcome. If you have questions, please ask me. Or if
ልዩነት መፍጠር ዓላማችን ነው። ዓለም አቀፍ ተወዳዳሪ መሆን አለባችሁ። የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ጥራትና ደረጃውን የጠበቀ ስልጠና በመስጠት ብቁ ዜጋ እያፈራን ነው። በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን፣ በበረራ መስተንግዶ፣ በቲኬቲንግና ሪዘርቬሽን፣ በሆቴልና ቱሪዝም ሙያዎች አሰልጥነን ተወዳዳሪ እናደርጎታለን። ኮሌጃችን ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና ከእንግሊዙ ICM ጋር በመተባበር ዓለም አቀፍ ዕውቅና ያለው ስልጠና እየሰጠ ይገኛል። በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን በበረራ መስተንግዶ የምንሰጣቸው ስልጠና ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና አለው። አድራሻ ከጎላጉል ታወር 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።